and viewers of This Week in Interview and of TDN Radio, of course. Good evening and welcome to another episode of This Week in Interview with your host, Anthony Drago. It's a pleasure being here with you. And we are for those of us in the US, it seems like it's a good time of the year because the weather is not too hot as yet, but it's pleasant. But in the Caribbean, especially this week, we have some folks who are hurting. Some folks I know who are listening to regular listeners to This Week in Interview have folks in Carriacou and Petit Martinique and Grenada and St. Vincent. And so you went through some traumatic experience this week. And so our thoughts are with you. And of course, we're trying to mobilize to see how we can assist your folks, your people. It was really, really dramatic and traumatic to watch the effects of Hurricane Beryl. But that segues nicely into what we plan to talk about this evening. My guest is Dr. Dion George, and he and I are going to talk about his work and his study, his research around governance, particularly the way the region is governed, how external forces such as the IMF and the World Bank, how their policies affect the way we are able to govern ourselves, and what are the outcomes for our people as a result of the demands that they make on our government. So we're going to talk about that. It sounds like much, but we're going to break it down and bring it in context, on context of Carriacou or Apiti Martinique or St. Vincent, who has to recover from devastation, and what are the resources that they have available that's going to help them to be able to get back to some semblance of normalcy in the shortest possible time. Yeah. So what I want you to do, as always, is to share the link with your friends and family. Share the live. Let people know that This Week in Interview is on, and we have this totally informative and exciting conversation on tap. Refresh your drink if you have to, and come right back. Okay. When we come back, I'm going to introduce you to my esteemed guest, Dr. Dion George, and we're going to have a pretty, thoughtful, thought-provoking, and relevant, very, very relevant and contemporary conversation. I will be right back. Another opportunity to, as we said, to invite 5 people to join us in this conversation. I'm expecting a very exciting and deep conversation with my guest tonight, Mr. Dion George. Dion is an author, he's a political scientist, and so he's my guest tonight. But before I do that, let me welcome you properly, and let me also reiterate what I do every week and tell you that I don't take your presence for granted. I know there's so much that's going on that competes for your attention. And so I really appreciate you making the time to spend with us here on This Week in Interview. So welcome to the program tonight. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. If tonight is the first time that you listen to This Week in Interview, I want you to I hope that you find our discussion sufficiently stimulating that is worth your time, that you too will become a regular listener to This Week in Interview. This Week in Interview is carried live in Dominica on DigiPlay Channel 59, RVR Jam. So if you know people in Dominica, text them, tell them to tune in. We are on. Also in the Toronto area, it's carried live on online radio SBE, um, primarily a Haitian centered community there, but they carry this weekend interview live, and we appreciate you for that. If you're listening to us on Facebook or on YouTube, give us a like if you haven't done so as yet. Subscribe, hit the notification bar. You can find out when we are on, so you can join us. And of course, at the bottom of the hour, we'll be taking a break and giving thanks to the folks who sponsor this week in interview. So as I said tonight we're going to talk about governance of Dominica, governance of the region, and by governance I mean the political party who's in power that run things. Government is made up of not just the party in power, but there's an opposition. There's the judiciary that folks who can go to for redress and to challenge laws if they choose to. And of course, there's the most important media, which we are part of. I consider us an arm of government because we are the ones who the media uses to get their message out, and how you as well can communicate with your fellow citizens and so on. So tonight we're going to talk about governance, and we're going to talk about it in the context of the some of these agencies. We call them donor agencies, such as the IMF and the World Bank, because our Caribbean community runs a lot on aid and soft loans and external funding and that sort of thing. And because of that, these organizations have an outsized their footprint on what happens is much larger than it should be. Sometimes they even have more say than the people of the country themselves. You may be following the events in Kenya, where the IMF had put some imposition on the government, and as a result, they were trying to pass a bill that was going to raise taxes, and the people took to protest, and it escalated out of control, and the police used live bullets, and people were killed, hundreds of people were injured, and now, although the bill has been withdrawn, protest continues because they're now calling for the resignation of the president. Do we have similar circumstances in the Caribbean where the IMF and the World Bank and the Canadian International Monetary Fund and so on say, well, we can lend you money at concessionary terms, but in order for you to get our qualified to get our money, you have to cut down your civil servants, you have to privatize your electric company, you have XYZ, all of those things. What do you think about that type of environment where folks from the outside of the region, outside of a country, seems to have so much sway and so much dictate on what happens? And so my guest tonight, we're going to talk about that. He has written a book entitled CARICOM and the IMF, a perpetual dependency. Um, Dr. Dion George. He has his PhD from Clark Atlanta University. His concentration is in American government, comparative politics, international relations, and Caribbean and Latin American politics. He has an MA, a master's degree in political science. And in that, his thesis was, do IMF structural adjustment programs achieve their desired results? A case study of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And that was from 2006. He has that master's degree. His PhD, by the way, was obtained in 2019. He has his bachelor degree in business computer information systems. He is a lecturer of American government at the University of North Georgia. He also was a lecturer in political science uh, at global which university, um, in the fields of American government, global issues, comparative politics, and introduction to public administration. He is involved in developing curricula for various institutions, and that was at Georgia um, Georgia Military College. He lectures there, and also at Atlanta Metropolitan State College. He's also an adjunct professor of political science. Uh, and so I can go on and on, but you get the idea. He's really qualified. He's an academic. He's a researcher. He's an intellectual person. He's an intellect in the whole field of politics, and governance. And I think he's well placed and well versed for us to have this conversation tonight about the governance in the Caribbean, the influence of organizations such as the IMF, and the impact that they have on the lives of the Caribbean. So I want you to join me and to wish Dr. Dion George, a very warm welcome. This is his first time on the program for this week in interview. So, Dr. George, welcome.
Yes. Good evening,
Good evening.
Mr. Anthony Drago, and thank you, Mr. Sam George. Um, I am pleased to be invited, and Mr. Drago, you didn't have to give all my accolades like that.
I
It's
did not give all. There's more. In those commercials, they say, wait, wait, there's more.
Yeah, but one thing that I want to tell God thank you for is, in my experience here in the United States, was being the director of my church, and also being, it's what for what it's worth, the director of the youth group in the church and serving the church. And so we always have to put God first in whatever we do. And so my purpose here this evening, I would say, um, is uh, is granted by God, and I ask the Holy Spirit to be with us. But also, I would also venture to say that I would like to share my research with the listening public, and that they can learn from it. And so tonight, I will give a synopsis of the first book, which is CARICOM and IMF, that was published in 2019, and it's primary research. And so I won't get in depth with all of the material. So what I have done, I have selected certain areas for which I think would just give a bird eye view, an overview of exactly what the book is about and what it researches. Okay, so if I may, and feel free, Mr. Drago, to interrupt me whenever you feel like, and to engage me whenever you feel like.
Well, let me do that right now.
Okay, excellent.
Let me do that and let the folks know that you're a son of the soil. You're originally from Dominica. I want you to talk about that a little bit. Where in Dominica you're from, and what, just give us a little background on the person. We got the accolades, we got the qualifications. Um, Give us a little background on who is Dion George.
Well, I am humbled, and I thank God every day of my dad. I wish I could show you his picture. He's from Monjon. His name is Clifford George.
Before George.
And yeah, and he was a defense force, and he worked in DBMC, and he was a farmer. Um, my mom is from Salisbury. Her name is Margaret George, and so I raised in Salisbury,
Hmm.
um, and um, and that's it. Just you know.
What age did you migrate to the U.S.? Because you currently live in the U.S., right?
Yes, I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hmm.
I left Dominica when I was 20 years old. But before that, I worked. My first job was the convent high school. Can you believe it? I taught at the convent high school, all girls Catholic
That's
school.
something we have in common. I taught at the convent as well.
Well, unless if Mrs. Levy lied to me, because she told me I'm the second male to teach there.
No, yeah. I taught in convent in 1986,
Okay,
and
good.
at the time there was Thomas Bell. I met Thomas Bell and Steve Joseph and Mr. Grimner
And there was a
from
guy
those
that plays
teachers.
for WCK. He was there too.
Yeah, his brothers play.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know him. Cedric's brother,
yeah.
Cedric Pemberton, Michael Peters.
Correct. And
Yeah.
then I went from there. I went to grammar school, and then I went to St. Joseph Secondary School where I coached cricket. By the way, I won two national championships. Yeah.
As a coach of St. Joseph Secondary.
Yeah, but don't give any credit to me. Those guys from Dublin and Salisbury and St. Joseph, they were very good.
Hmm, hmm.
Person in the light of Len Shillingford and Jamie John Baptist. I had very good players.
I taught Jimmy John Baptist in technical college when I came back to
Yeah,
study. If it's the same Jimmy John Baptist, probably I think that he was down from the West Coast.
yeah.
I taught at the technical college in 91, 92, 93. And I taught Jimmy as well.
Well, yeah. So that's who I am.
Hmm,
That's where I'm from. Just a local boy, and I'm very thankful to God for the opportunity He has graced me.
hmm,
And with the little graces He have given me, I would like to share some research that I think is important. When I wrote it, it was part of that book, IMF and CARICOM, Perpetual Dependency. It was part of my dissertation
hmm.
for my, yeah,
For your
and
PhD.
yes, for the PhD. And the significance of it, Mr. Drygo, is there has been very little original primary research on the relationship between CARICOM and IMF. First of all, countries are somewhat individualized, and you find very little scholars spending time looking at, well, as a region, how do we evaluate our relationship? Now, I will pause to say that there are times a lot of persons write book about the Caribbean and they look at previous authors. So that's secondary data. That means someone read a book and they are reporting in their book what it is. Now,
Hmm,
yeah, the importance of this research, I believe, is that it's primary data. So what I did, sir, is I called 15 CARICOM countries.
hmm,
I called
hmm,
all the less developed countries and the more developed countries, and I asked to speak to the head of government. And uh, I would say about 50% of the heads of government were not available, but I can mention specifically some that were available. Trinidad, head of government, was available. St. Kitts, head of government, was available. Unfortunately, Dominica, head of government, was not available, but I did get to speak to someone within the parameter of his who represented, the government. And so the main research question is, what do the Caribbean leaders believe in their perception is the use of the IMF? Because I am not a radical, but I come from a school that is very objective, I would say. Perhaps that's being presumptuous, but the view that when the IMF was created, sir, and for the listeners, the Caribbean did not exist. And I want to repeat that. That's a poignant point. The Bretton Woods system was created after World War II. And it was created because Europe was destroyed. And they fought themselves, Germany, Hitler, uh, Japan, Pearl Harbor, D-Day in France. And so Europe was destroyed. And so they created a group which is called the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods system is a system that was created in the United States, in New Hampshire, in a city called Bretton Woods. And essentially, they created three organizations. They created one, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which its purpose was to try to stabilize the world currency that the 1933 uh, uh, Great Depression would not repeat itself. So they created an institution to make sure that that does not happen. So, and then other,
because just to stick a pin so people can understand. Because during the Great Depression, there was a run on the bank, so to speak, and the banking system pretty much collapsed.
yes.
And that's why they had to come up with a system to stabilize the currency. But go ahead. I just wanted to put that
No,
clarification.
no,
Thank you.
feel free to interject me anytime you feel free. Yeah.
Mm.
All right, so that was one institution. It remains the same thing, but right now they're doing many other things. They're giving short-term loans. They're giving technical support. I'm just giving you the functions of what
Yeah,
IMF does.
the IMF.
Yeah. They give technical support. So they might not give you dry cash, but they might send persons to tell you how to do irrigation, for example, in African countries, etc. Right. So that's the IMF. They also created a bank, which is called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It's called the IBRC, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The purpose of that bank was to give loans to countries who have been devastated by the war. That bank name has changed. Its name today is called the World Bank.
The
So it's
World
no
Bank.
longer, it's called the World Bank. And they basically assist not just Europe, but the world. And they give loans, as we know. And we will talk about the hurricanes in the Caribbean, where we are part of the global system. And we will and can get loans from them. And then the third institution that was created was called GATT, GATT. G as in George, A as in Apple, TT as in tree. It's the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. And essentially, what that organization did is that they tried to cumulate the world trading system. The name of that organization has transformed, and it has, they call it today the World.
Trade Organization.
Correct.
Mhm.
So it's WTO. But essentially, what they foster is the idea of having free trade, and I can get into that. And so I just give you the background of the IMF and what they do and who their tentacles are stuck to. But I want to make one important point before we move on. Is the fact that that happened in 1945 thereabout. Keep in mind, we became independent 1976, 78. Dominica became 78. But the other countries like Jamaica and them 1972, thereabout. The point is, we never existed. So there is a Caribbean leader. His name is Michael Manley. He said that when he went, the interest on those loans was so high. He said, I mean, he cannot deal with that. It's like it's called it's like a recurring decimal. It's like a debt trap, it's called. So I will get the loan, but then I owe you more. And so I just keep on owing you. And he said, think of it. During the time he asked for the first help, um, he said basically that Jamaica was not independent. And so when Jamaica finally got independent, okay, let me go back. When IMF and the World Bank and GATT was created, the Caribbean did not exist. What do I mean by that? We were not independent then.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So in other words,
We were we were departments of some European country.
country, so we belong to them.
Mhm.
So the bottom line here and the underlying thematic context is the view that it was not made for our interest. It was made for their interest. That's point number one. The other thing I would like to talk about, and again, feel free to interrupt me anytime you want, is I want to describe how the IMF deals with developing countries and so forth. So I made three talking points here concerning how the IMF works. The first thing is this. So you have a problem. Say, for example, Hurricane Beryl or Hurricane Maria. You cannot pay your teachers. But okay, outside of the hurricane, there are times we find ourselves in a hardship. The IMF will give you what is called a structural adjustment program. It's called SAP, SAP, structural adjustment program. And typically what that entails is one, they would tell you that all your state companies, that you should privatize them. They think that privatization is more effective than government-run programs. Perhaps that's true, but then again, there is a flaw to that because, as you can see in some of the African countries, that they are losing it to those institutions. That's just one point. The other thing that they do, they encourage countries to raise their primary and products. Like a coconut could have been $2 in Dominica, and now today a jelly cocoa might go for $5. And they are saying that's good for the economy. Now, I don't know if it might be good for the economy. It might be good for taxes. It's not good for the local person. That's my view, you know. Again, they have other things. They talk about free trade. The idea of free trade is to remove protection. So protection would come in the form of taxes on the pot. If you're a foreign country, that they would have tariffs and quota quantity, quota on the amount of goods you can bring in. And so the IMF purports the view that you should remove those things. Another thing that they do, which I don't like, but there is a economical view to it, is to reduce your currency. Currently, as I know, Dominica's currency is maybe $2.68 to $1.
Mm-hmm.
Jamaica is like $101, as far as I recall the last time, to $1. The purpose the IMF recommends that, which I have never got the logic in it, but there is a logic, is the view that it makes your products more affordable. So if somebody goes to Jamaica now with $100, the amount of things they can buy would be a lot. And so it thinks it makes their products more affordable for external income to come in. That's the rationale behind that. Now, in that book, Perpetual Dependency, and again, one of the things that you set up, which I thought was very good, is the whole idea of the purpose of this conversation. So I saw the flyer that you sent out, and I want to tell you thank you for doing that. Is what is the way forward? But before we get to the answer as to what is the way forward, we have to also look at where we came from. And so what I did is not, again, I told you, it's not secondary research. It's not something that I read a book and I write what I read. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that I literally called the prime ministers of the Caribbean and I asked them questions, etc. I categorize the Caribbean in 4 stages. When I say the Caribbean, I mean CARICOM, 15 countries, and of course we have associate states who are not fully members, like Haiti, right? I said in the 1950s to the 1960s, we have what is called export-oriented industrialization. Interestingly, as much as I say I categorize it, that's not my author. It's a guy named called Arthur Lewis, who
So after Lewis and St. Lucia.
correct, very good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we're talking about St. Lucia, believe it or not, you know, St. Lucia is one of the few countries in the entire world to have two Nobel
Prize winners, right?
Prize winners. Yeah, Arthur Lewis, and what is the other one name?
I want to say Walcott, but I don't think Walcott is St. Lucian. He's on.
Tell me Walcott last name.
Was it Derek Walcott? No, Derek Walcott is, but I think he's Trinidadian.
No, man. So Arthur Lewis, and one who wrote poems.
Yeah, he wrote books as well. I read one of his novels, very, very brilliant novel. He's not coming
Yeah,
right
man.
now, but yeah, definitely,
Yeah,
I
St.
know who he
Lucia
is.
should be
Yeah,
proud of themselves. They are one
yeah,
of the few countries to have two
yeah.
Nobel Prize
So,
winners.
so let me engage you a little bit on what you've said so far, right?
Yeah,
You've laid the foundation of how the IMF came about and the whole monetary system and so on, and it was very clear that it was not made for us. And when I say us, I mean the Caribbean, and we can lump Africa in there as well. It was created to help to reconstruct Europe and also probably to get access to resources from Germany and whatnot. It wasn't conceived um, with us in mind.
correct.
However, it has been applied to us. So so when we started needing what they perceive to be their help, they say, oh, instead of inventing stuff that's specifically tailored to us, let's just use what we already have. Let's retrofit, let's whatever. And so because of that, we can already get the impression that it may not be a perfect fit. Oh, so Alvin is saying it is Derek Walcott. Oh, my brain is not too bad. Alvin Thomas is saying the two St. Lucians is Sir Arthur Lewis and Sir Derek Walcott.
That is
Oh,
very correct.
yeah, yeah. So I wasn't. I was on the money. Good. I'm correct 51% of the time, and that's all I need.
Mm.
Um. So I don't. Do you want to like speak a little bit about the type of results that we have been seeing, the people of the Caribbean have been seeing? Have they been seeing an improvement in their quality of life because of our engagement with the IMF? Is there room for improvement? Would they have been worse off without involvement of the IMF? Are they better off? What did your research reveal in that regard?
Okay, that's a very direct question, and I will answer it. Yes, but I will also contextualize the answer. So I
Hmm.
was saying that Arthur Lewis spoke about export-oriented industrialization. Correct?
Right.
Yes, and that was between, I would say, the 1950s to 1960s. The second uh, era I sort of organized is import substitution industrialization, where the view was that it's best that we eat what we grow and not import so much. The third one, which came in the 1970s, 1980s, is the advent of the IMF, where we started taking loans and hoping for. Now, to answer your question, now the fourth one I have, which we'll not talk about tonight, is the rippling effect of the IMF. And that is a topic for another day. But what I would submit for your consideration is the view that when I interviewed the head of states of the different Caribbean islands or personnel within their office who responded to me, their view is that the Caribbean islands are vulnerable. And I will agree partially to that perspective. I'll tell you why. My brother, if one um, is, how do I say that? You see, you have to be careful, you know.
No, no, you don't have to be careful on my
No,
program. No, but yeah,
no, no.
but yeah. Mhm.
If you have a country that has extract from you when you were a child, before you grew, it was all taking your cocoa, taking your lime, taking your bananas, and you belong to them. And then all of a sudden, you're on your own. And then you have what is called, Lucky Dobby calls it flag, uh, flag independence, something like that. In other words, what is independence? Does it mean that in November 3rd, 1978, Dominica is independent? We are an independent country. That is true. But can we take care of ourselves? If a hurricane happened to us today, do we have reserves that we can take care of ourselves? It's like you being a man and married to a woman and you divorce and you break up. Can you take care of yourself? That is what independence means.
Yeah.
And the answer is no. And so we have to go back and ask our mother. Who is our mother? Our mother is Great Britain. I use the word great, but anyway, um, is England. So we have to go and say, can we get help? Okay, now we go to organizations, which is called the Global North. So we say we need help. If we have a conflict now, let's say, for example, UWP and Labour have a big fight, guess what we go to? The Global North. It's different for the Global North. If America have a problem, they defend themselves. Yeah, you best believe it. But we cry when they hit Salisbury, the regional forces, the same people we're talking about there. We cried. We cried to the Global North, can we get help? And so I say that to say that we are dependent on them. The second part of my book, and I'm answering your question, but in very clear context, I talked about theories. Now, people say, can you talk about something pragmatic? You best believe theories push policy. So there is something called dependency theory. There is something called realism. There is Moism, that's from China. And there are different theories. There's liberalism. You
And
know,
those systems of government or those economic models,
economic theories.
economic theories. Okay.
Yeah, basically how you take care of business.
How you approach
Yes,
the administration of your
yes.
affairs. Okay.
Mhm. There is a mixed theory. There is a mainstream theory. But these things are important because government do use those things. Now, to answer your question just poignantly, when I did the research, I use indices to measure how I would say whether or not it works or it doesn't work. And again, I want to be very clear. There are several indices that one can relate to. Typically, what economists do, they relate to the GDP, right? As you know, is the gross domestic product. Some people use a more specific thing, is the gross domestic product per capita. That's another one. There are other persons who use the Gini coefficient. Now I'm getting very specific here. The Gini coefficient essentially looks at um, how much money that persons have and how much it is worth. So if
I've never heard of Jimmy before. What are the acronyms? GM what? GMI?
Gini coefficient is GINI.
GINI. Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
haven't heard
essentially
of
what
that
it
one.
measures
Okay.
is the worth of your money.
Money.
Yeah. And
I
then of
forget my
course,
economics. I have a minor in economics, but I've never heard of Jimmy before. But
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, it's and then the other one is the debt to GDP ratio. So these are a lot
Hmm.
of indices that people use.
Right.
And so yeah. And so in other words, how much are you able to pay your debts? How much you owe in and how much are you able to pay? So in terms of the IMF, sir, to answer you, under Eugenia Charles, I think we had a jet to the GDP ratio of maybe 70 something. I don't have my book in front of me now. The book I
Hmm.
have in front of me, this is it. Um, this is the one about intergovernmental relations, right? Yeah, correct. That's it. The other one, I don't have a copy here right now, and you can get it on Amazon for the listening public. So
Hmm.
two books, the intergovernmental relations and CARICOM and IMF,
So
perpetual.
I want you to mention the measurement, the factors, because I'm pushing up hard against our commercial break. So once you mention them, we go
Okay,
to
yeah.
a
So
break
I'll
and then we
mention it
come back.
quickly.
Hmm.
Essentially, my
Hmm.
friend, to answer your question, not with my opinion, but with the data, the debt per GDP ratio has increased drastically
From under Miss Charles, what was it?
from Miss Charles to this current administration.
So Miss Charles was in the 80s,
Yeah,
and what was it then? You said
it was about 60 or 70% thereabout.
60 or 70%.
Yeah,
60 or 70
yeah. And I
percent.
stand to correction, but it
So
was low. Right now, I think that thing is almost again. I didn't know you
yeah,
were going to ask
at
me that
last count
question.
it was it was approaching 100 and
Yeah, it's almost 100. It's
a
not
hundred
100 right
and
now. I
two,
mean, I
and then
have
I
video
think
in front.
they bring it back down a little bit, but it's averaging 100%.
Yeah,
And so for people like me who are lay people, the GDP is the total production of the country, social output of the country in monetary terms, and your debt is how much you've borrowed from people
yes.
internally and externally. So when you take your debt and you divide it by the amount you produce, you get the debt to GDP
The
ratio.
ratio, very
And you're
low.
saying in the 80s it was 60%,
Yeah, 60 to
but
70.
but now it's like 100%. So
Almost 100, yeah, if not
it's
100.
as if you work, you have your salary, you get your salary at the end of the month, and in the 80s you only needed 60% of your salary to live on. Now you have all of your salary going to live on. So you have no money for emergencies, you have no money for contingencies. So we're worse off now than we were back then. When we come back, we're going to see how much of that is attributable to our relations with the IMF and how much of it is just, as they like to say, well, hard times everywhere. So Dominica is no exception. So we'll be right back. All right. So folks, my guest tonight, I hope you agree with me that this is a very, very interesting conversation that takes us into an understanding where we can we can understand when people talk to us, when our government talk to us, when as a reporter, whatever it is, you know what questions to ask, you know what things mean. When you go to your credit union annual general meeting, you have a little idea of what you should be talking about. when people talk about tourism and agriculture and so on, so that is where our conversation is taking you, to make you more comfortable around people who are technical people in those fields, because guess what? It affects you. It affects how you can pay for your house. It affects how you can send your children to school. It affects what you eat. It affects how much potholes that's in the road. So you are spending a lot of money on tires and repairing of your vehicle and all that. My guest tonight is Dr. Dion George. And I describe him as a political scientist, but from the discussion tonight, you can see he's also an economist. Um, One of the questions I want to address when we come back, when he gives his report on the IMF, I am going to ask him, and he might not answer, but the fact that one of the men who was proposing to be prime minister of Dominica is a former employee of is it the IMF or the World Bank he is
I
that
am.
therefore the IMF? So is that therefore another dimension from which we have to look at that prospect? But we'll be right back. Let's take a word from our sponsor.
Presented by.
People say I've got a great smile. Well, I have to say, this is all thanks to the professional team at Beacon Dental Group right here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I've got world-class dental care. Beacon Dental Group has expert and caring staff dedicated to providing the most advanced and satisfactory treatment in all aspects of oral health. Their services are designed to meet your needs and give you a perfect smile, too. General checkups, cosmetic surgery, Gemini laser service, and advanced procedures, all in a state-of-the-art facility. Call or visit Beacon Dental Group today, 1026 Blue Hill Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts, or call 617-282-2146 for a smile that lights the world.
How much Dominican history do you know? Want to learn some fun facts? We have a great and fun way to test your knowledge and learn more about our history. Get your copy of Dominic Anu, Dominica in Puzzle. Fun for the whole family. Available now on Amazon.com. Visit pushpast10.com to learn more. Email us at dominicainpuzzle@gmail.com or call 877-698-9894. Looking to promote your business, engage current customers, and reach new people? Well, look no further. From the basic presentation to a fully fledged advertisement, use your video ads to attract customers. At Man's Audiovisual Productions, we do just that. We produce videos for business and event promotions, product demo videos, animated explainer videos, fundraiser ads, and much, much more. Engage your clients and sell online. We customize the video to match your brand design. Guaranteed to play flawless on all devices, including smart TVs. Contact us at telephone number 203-690-4342 or 767-245-6238. Visit our website, mansaudiovisual.com, or email us at derekvideo@gmail.com.
All right, so welcome back, folks. My guest tonight on this weekend interview is Dr. Dion George, and Dion is the author of two books. He has CARICOM and the IMF, Perpetual Dependency, and also what is it? The Politics of Intergovernmental Relations. He's a PhD in political science, and he's a lecturer of government and so on. So we have a really interesting first half. Dion said Dr. George said the foundation for us. How the IMF came about, what was the purpose of the IMF, why was it created, how does it relate with regards to how we manage our affairs in the region. The question of dependency came on, which is part of the title of his book, and of course, he highlighted that when those organizations like the World Bank and the IMF and the WTO was created, we did not even yet exist as countries. We didn't have a self-determining aspect to our government. We had to go and ask permission to execute decisions that we made,
That's
and
very
then we
correct.
and then we became independent. And he said, well, what does that independence mean? Does it only mean that we now have a flag that we can wave when we go to our CO? What does it mean? We haven't touched our constitution by and large. We haven't adjusted our operations to suit us. A lot of what I like to say is that the whole of Europe used the Caribbean and Africa and Asia to build empires, and then we've had control of the same resources that they've had, and in 50 years we haven't made as much progress as they made. Why is that? I mean, yeah, they had slavery and they had free labor and whatever, but we have so much less need than they have. When you look at, I always make the comparison that in Dominica we have one hospital, maybe we need two. We have 10 schools, we have less than 100 miles of road. You know, um, what does it take to run a country that requires so little, that we're making such heavy weather of it? We watch Dominica get devastated by Hurricane Maria 7 years ago. 2017 I think was Erika, and but many years ago. Why is it taking us so long to climb out of that? If we know that we get struck by hurricane, why don't we have systems in place that would lessen the impact and speed up the recovery and back to normalcy? So this is where this discussion becomes relevant. This is definitely where this discussion becomes very, very relevant to our everyday life. It is literally a question of life and death, because if our resources are not properly allocated, guess what? Nobody tell you that you cannot build in a waterway and the river comes down and it washes you away, and your family perish. If nobody, if we don't have the resources to enforce, to develop, and to enforce building codes, we build substandard buildings and we get an earthquake and everybody dies. Not everybody, but multiple people dies. We get a hurricane and people lose their roof. And there's so many claims on our insurance companies that our insurance companies goes bankrupt. And all of those things are life and death situations that have real consequences, and that is what this discussion is about tonight, to make you familiar with those factors that affect you every single day. Do we have the resources, that so we have correct people in place, that if there is a tropical storm or tropical warning, we don't send people out on the streets and then they get stranded or they get whatever it is? Where are all of those mechanisms and systems and institutions that help us to run our affairs? And so let me just take a quick look at what people are saying on the chat. If you don't, we don't see you if you don't make a comment. So uh, James Bailey saying very informative and enlightening. Matilda Popo is also agreeing that it's reflective and informative, and interesting. Uh, we have Alvin told us that, yeah, Arthur Lewis and Derek Walcott are from St. Lucia and they are Nobel Prize laureates. Um, Derek Mann is saying that's an interesting conversation and saying good night. There are other comments on Facebook, but in interest of time, we will not. So yeah, Sam George is saying that tropical storm Erika was actually in 2017. So that is 7 years ago. And if Beryl had hit us, we would have found some folks still without roof from 7 years ago. Where are the resources of the state to assist the most vulnerable among us. So, Dion, when we broke to hear from our sponsors, we were talking about the results that we have seen, that our people have experienced um, as a result of our interaction, our dependence on organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and so on. So if you want to pick it up from there, because I know I cut you short on the commercial break, so you can continue from there, just talking about that, and then we can bring it into what it means on an everyday basis and maybe what we can do about it.
Yeah,
It's a lot in a
yeah,
short amount of time, but let's jump in.
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Anthony Drago. I'm very happy the platform that you laid before you asked me that other question. I'll tell you why. I'm going to mention three authors' name to you. They are established in their field, and the listening public can recognize who they are. One of the name is Kyrie Leavitt. She has a book called Reclaiming Development, Independent Thought and the Caribbean. She is basically in Canada right now, and she teaches at a university. But she has a very profound book where she argues that that the global north has about 90% of the banana industry. So let's say, for example, Del Monte, Chiquita, and all of those conglomerates. And what the Caribbean had, the Windward Islands, Dominica, St. Lucia, and Vincent, Grenada, was just like 10%. But then in 1995, they sued the United States, sued the World Bank, not the World Bank. What was GATT? Now, what is the World Trade Organization? And they said it's unfair to them that we were getting what is called privilege advantage or something of that sort on the international
Preferential treatment, yeah, preferential treatment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they sued and they won, and that destroyed our banana industry. Something where you would see a young man who did not have the opportunity to go to college, and but he could go in garden, and every week he would sell banana, every 2 weeks. So you ask me, what does it mean to our people? These international organizations, we need them. We were children. We would, and that's the truth, we were the child, but we are perpetually dependent on them. So when they make laws now, it's the laws that fit them. Okay, that's point number one.
Mm-hmm.
The other point I would like to make, Carrie Levitt, this professor from Canada, she mentions that there's another author, his name is Walter Rodney. You must be familiar with him.
Yeah, Guyanese, huh?
Guyana, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he spent a lot of his time in Africa and also in Jamaica. And he has a book which is called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Right.
And his view is that they extracted the diamonds, the golds, and all the resources, and they never, in the best way, to invest, let's say, in technology. Why can't Africa have, its own technology of having planes and having a service industry? When I say service, I mean like a big finance industry. And so his view is that they have not given back as much as they should. And it's a very interesting read, and it gets deeper, but I cannot get into the entire book. But he also talked about the fact that, Africa is not like the Caribbean where we are separated by water, but his view is that there are land boundaries, and he said they did that on purpose. So you have African countries fighting with African countries for land, like how family does,
Right.
Yeah, there's another guy, his name is George Beckford, and he has a very interesting piece called Underdevelopment Plantation, and his view is that George Beckford, his view is that he called it economies of the third world. Everything we have, and again I want to tie that to Dominica, Because Judge Beckford is saying that we export in all our primary products, but we don't, how you call it?
We don't process them. We don't add value.
My brother, you helped me there. Thank you. We don't add no value to it. And he said that's another underdevelopment. And then the last one I would mention is Claude Ake. Claude Ake is an African. He has a book called Democracy and Development of Africa. And his view is...
How do you spell Ake? I'm sorry.
Ake
A-K-Y?
spells A-K-E.
A-K-E. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm putting it in the chat so the audience can have it.
Yeah, so Claude spells C-L-A-U-D-E, and Ake spells A-K-E. And his book, this is a phenomenal book. It's called Democracy and Development of Africa. And the main thematic theme of that book is the view that, okay, forget George Beckford, forget Walter Rodney, forget Carrie Levitt. Okay, today we are independent. For what it's worth, what Claude Ake is saying is that our people, our leaders are using Mr. Anthony Drago, Yemi. Our people are using the word democracy as like a niche or a cliche, if you will, to re-enslave us. So what Claude Ake is saying in Democracy and Development is our own people, and here we get to Dominica again, and not just Dominica, or the Caribbean islands as well. Our own people are saying when they're in power, they can stay there for 20 years. My brother, Barack Obama, as most people, not me, can confess, was a good president. What did he promise? I would say three things. He promised to give universal health care. He did it. He said he would end the war in Iraq. He did. In fact, he got a Nobel Peace Prize, which people said he did not deserve it. He was too young. He was too fast. But he ended a big war. Anyway. And by the way, he has been criticized for that as well. It says that he left a vacuum there, which made ISIS develop. But that's another story. But I think he did well to end the war. The other thing that he did, under his administration, not he, but he killed bin Laden, just to be quite frank. And it was I would use the word a ballsy call to send troops in Pakistan without their authority and destroy him. All right. So I think, for whatever it was. And he rebuilt the market. I mean, we had not a great recession.
He took over in a bad state and revived it.
And yes. So I mean, give him credit. I say that to say about Claude Ake is the fact that Obama did so well, but he cannot run again though. Clinton, he cannot run again though, because there are constitutional laws that keep people balanced, meaning that the law of the land is you cannot run for more than 2 terms. So my brother, you have 8 years in office, period. In the global south, what we are experiencing is the view that persons can stay there for 20-something years. Vierbird, Roosevelt Skerritt, on and on. So you're telling me there's nobody.
The guy in St. Vincent, Ralph Gonzalez.
I have met him twice. He came to Clark Atlanta and met us. I met him twice. I met his son too. You know, we played cricket. I met Keith Mitchell. These guys.
One from Grenada, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
anyway,
so this is important. What you just raised is important, because I've been having arguments with a lot of folks. Supposedly we're on the same side. It's no secret. If you listen this week in interview, you know I am not a supporter of Roosevelt Skerritt and the current administration in Dominica. I think they've been there too long, and with negative results to show. I have friends on here who are labor rights that I'm agreeing right now, but I have folks who agree with me on that point. And the point I have made to them is that they're clamoring for electoral reform. but not one person on the opposition side is asking for the most critical part of electoral reform,
What
which
is
is
that?
term limits and a fixed date for election. To me, if
Um,
you don't have those two things, anything else you have is a waste of time. And I have folks who don't agree with me at all. Like, oh, you cannot get everything, take what you can get. No, blah, blah, blah. The problem we've got, one of the main and central problems in governance in the Caribbean is the lack of term limits.
okay,
And I
Mr.
think that's what
Tribal.
I'm hearing you say.
Well, uh, I would say partially. I would say partially. What I will say is this: the issue, and you, I stand for correction. The issue that Dominicans had with the whole idea of electoral reform is the view that the voters list was bloated, that it need to be cleansed. That's number one. And number two, I want to make it very simple, like you said. And number two was the influence of the overseas voters. I thought that were the two paramount issues. Now,
Okay.
so,
So,
so what you mentioned there is important. You
no, but
mentioned,
what I'm saying is that take that as a given. Okay. Let us say that is not fixed. But two election cycles, the prime minister is gone anyway. With the same bloated list, right? With the same importation of voters, after two terms, he's gone.
okay, very good point. All right. Well, I will yield to your argument because I think you are hitting on what I just said about Claude Ake. The fact that our Caribbean leaders want to stay in forever, like almost dictators. And that's a valid point. In the context of the spelling of the word, that would be constitutional reform. To go in parliament and say that from now on, in our parliamentary democracy, which is not a presidential democracy, that we no longer want the president, the prime minister to be elected as much as they elect him. No, we want to put term limits. That have to go to parliament.
And I agree. And I say, even if it means we have to undo our independence, go back to Britain and get our independence again, get together a new constitution, we should do it because the alternative is too costly.
Well, this is an interesting thing that you're saying, and you are going too far. I'll tell you.
I know I'm going too far, but
No, you
I'm
don't
doing
have
an
to go back to Britain.
hyperbole.
In fact, I will tell you something.
Mhm.
I have heard, I don't know if they will, but I have heard the United Workers' Party. I don't want to speak if I am not sure. But I've heard,
You say you've heard, so
yes,
yeah. Mhm.
that if they were in office, that they would implement term limits, which I think is a very good thing for democracy.
I don't believe them.
You don't believe that they would implement term limits?
No.
So you are judicious about
You
all
know
the
why I say I
parties?
don't believe them?
Mm.
Because in all of the clamoring that we've had for electoral reform,
Mm.
that is not one of the things that they're asking for in the
Well,
current electoral
again, I
reform.
don't know. I like to give people a chance. I think the two main things is the overseas vote to dilute that it doesn't impact the elections in the Caribbean, in Dominica. And the other thing is to clean up the voters list. I think that's paramount. Yes, you're correct. And Claude Ake, the offer in Africa, is correct that term limits is important. Uh, but yeah, that's where we are.
You will come back and we can argue that another time. I don't want to take you away from the main focus of our conversation tonight.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that in the sense that folks say we are small islands, we have limited resources. Therefore, we depend on the goodwill of other nations. We depend on the grace of the IMF and the World Bank. And if it's not for that, we're not able to survive. The Prime Minister of Dominica went on record after Hurricane Maria and says, if you all don't help us, Dominica cannot make it out of where we are in terms of the devastation. Where does that sit in terms of your research, in terms of your conclusions? Is it necessary to continue to deal with those institutions? Do we have any leverage in those dealings? So, in other words, banks exist to make loans. So, are we undervaluing our role or our importance to them? that we do have some leverage that we can renegotiate with them. We can negotiate it. I don't even know if we negotiate, that we can negotiate with them. Talk about that aspect of it. What can we do? What should we do? If you had the ear of the leaders of Dominica, of Trinidad, of the other islands, and they say, boy, we between the devil and the deep blue sea, we have to deal with the World Bank and the IMF. How would we proceed doing that? Or are you of the view that we can discard those relationships and try to make it on our own?
Mr. Anthony Drago, that's a very deep question. And I will answer you based on what I said in my book. And by the way, before I just answer you, the book is available on Amazon for the listening public. It's CARICOM and IMF, Perpetual Dependency.
And put the titles up, please. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, by myself, Dion George. And the second one is The Politics of Intergovernmental Relation, which deals with how the national, the state, and the local government interacts with each other. When the federal government tell them to do something, they better do it, and that's just what it is. I mean, there are some states that are very rebellious, like Texas and Georgia, where I live, but it's what it is. And it's an interesting read, yeah. And they're not expensive. The first one, I think, is like $15. Yeah. All right, so that's it. I think Alvin says not having a set date and some term limits for election is deterrent to democracy in a current world of politics. All right. So to answer your question, sir, refresh my memory again.
I was saying that without saying it explicitly, we come to the conclusion that our relationship with the IMF and the World Bank
so you were
has
saying,
not yielded
is it worthwhile? If it's worthwhile.
Yeah, is it worthwhile? And if it is, how can we change to have a better outcome, or can we discard them completely?
Okay, excellent. Well, I spoke of that in the book, and this is the answer. Again, I like to answer with context, not yes or no, because yes or no is just what I would call normative. It's just like a subjective answer. I like to put meaning.
The world is not black and white. There's nuance. There's
So keep in mind that we were colonized. Keep in mind that we have a flag independence, and so we are actually dependent on the global north. That's the first premise here. The second premise is this: is it worthwhile? We have to be careful, and I'll tell you, and I'll use two primary examples. One is Michael Manley from Jamaica. There is a documentary which is called oh my God, Debt. Oh my God, it will come back to me in a minute. But Michael Manley said that when he went to Washington, D.C., and the interest rate they gave him, it was so high. Now I'm making point to the IMF, Yeah. He said it was so high. He told them, but how am I going to pay that back? How much do you give your American farmers? And he said that Washington told him, what I give American farmers is what I give American farmers. What I give in you is what I give in you. That is just one point. Eugenia Charles, and let me call her Dame Eugenia Charles, may her soul rest in peace. She said one time she went for a loan, and she said she cannot take it because she figured out how in the world. My brother, you're touching on something very deep there. I'm even shivering, What this current administration is doing, taking these loans free and fancy. You see, my children and your children and their grandchildren, they will be indebted. It's called the debt trap. You ask me, is it worthwhile? Well, we need it if a hurricane happens and we haven't got money. We haven't got money, Again, I give you the background. The background is the view that we were not independent. And I defined what independent means. Independent means if you and your wife finish, that you can survive on your own, she can survive on her own. You're independent. But if you need your mother, if your mother says, move in my house, can you survive on your own? So if we get independent from Britain, can we survive? The answer is we are not financially independent. And I have given you Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I've given you Claude Ake. I've given you Carrie Levitt. I've given you George Becken. And I've given you some scholars who have studied this phenomenon where they are seeing that we're really dependent on them. Now, the direct question, do we need them? We need them. Now, can we, about the concern of leverage, this is interesting, and I'm going to go on a tangent here. I don't want to be considered a radical, but I'm not. I'm a Christian.
You might be a radical Christian.
They say Christ was a radical. Uh, we have alternatives, and I've been very careful how I say it. Now, some people might not like it. The Chinese is an alternative. Russia right now in a problem there with Ukraine, but they just went to North Korea and try to get some weapons. They're working with Iran, and the people of the Caribbean, we have been traditionally aligned with the Western world. It depends on your loyalty, I mean, there are other options. There are some political scientists, not me, but there are some others who have said that the US have left a void in the Caribbean region prior to the interference of China in the region and in the southern part of the world, global South, Africa, building stadiums and giving projects, etc. They are saying that that should have been the US role, and they left it out. Now, who gave us the stadium? China. Who gave us this? China. And so, direct to your question, do we have leverage? Well, we have alternatives. Now, would it be a long-term benefit a good deal? And can we trust them as a alternative investor, or is it another form of colonialism? And that's the view that some persons are dubious about, the view that we don't trust them and so forth. And it's very sad. But I don't want to talk about emotions about being sad. It's just, I mean, what are the options that we have? And so what I would say about leverage is our leaders can what they call renegotiate, meet the persons in Washington and say, hey, this is the deal, if we have a hurricane, I mean, give us a money at a reasonable rate, and here are the terms at which we can pay you back. Also, and let's get into more economics, which is called political economy. Open up your markets to us. Open up your markets. Why, when I go to places, I don't see Dominica products there? Very rare. So what does it cost to do that? You said in your voicemail for this program about what are our options. I mean, first of all, we need a vessel that can travel the Caribbean. I don't understand how these people say in their government, and the first thing we need is to transport our products. My brother, there are some people in Salisbury, I'll not call their name, which I don't think they would mind, that lost in thousands of pounds of tomatoes and watermelon, when it have some places in the world that would love that. Instead, they import it from the US. And so our leaders have to really come to two things: market, and within ourselves. Why would Barbados and Antigua have to be buying products from the US when Dominica can produce all the watermelon and tomatoes they need? All.
So, in your research,
yes,
and your conversations with the leaders of the various countries, did you find that there was a lack of creativity, a lack of, how do you say it, will for the leaders of the countries to sit down and to really determine what is best for their people, for our people as a region? and to strategize the best way to get there? Did you get disjointed answers from different people? Did you perceive that there is some kind of an agenda? Because we have CARICOM, we have the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, we have the OAS, we have different organizations. Did you see any kind of cooperation, collaboration, and even on an individual island, did you see evidence of like a strategic plan that would take folks along from where they were to where they needed to be?
Right. So one of my research questions, and that's a very good question, is why would, again, I will repeat, why would the Caribbean leaders continue using these international organizations, even if the result has not been as what the desired result should be? Over 4 decades, I would say about 40 years, thereabout.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
That's a very interesting reframing of the question, but I like it.
yeah, but that was my exact question I have in the book.
Hmm.
I have some results, and the results again, it's not because I read all these offers I mentioned. It's because I actually called Trinidad, I called Jamaica, I called St. Kitts. I had one of my girlfriends help me. Um, one of the results is that one, and I tally the results based on what the 15 country says. I did a graph. It says that the leaders normally use the IMF as last resort. Last resort. So is when we really cannot do it. That's number one. So in other words, we need them. And when we need them, they give us what is called conditionalities. They say, okay, you need me? Well, here is the basis on which I'm going to give you that loan. Often it's not favorable. Okay? Sometimes the interest is too high. The payment, yeah.
So the IMF is our payday loan
Why you think I call the book Perpetual Dependency?
dependency, huh? Yeah.
So yes, they're giving us the loan because we need it.
And we
However,
desperate for it at the time we go to them.
right. So I told you it is last resort. Now, there's another point I would like to make, which I think is a poignant point. When we get the loan, and this is something that makes me shiver, our leaders, so I'm not blaming the IMF. No, man, sometimes the IMF give us the money. If we use it well, it could work for us for what it's worth. Our leaders sometimes take the monies and they put it in their political campaigns. Now, one would argue, why would the IMF say, do not do that? IMF do not get involved in the domestic political agenda of a country. It's like a bank. You have good credit, you come for your money, and they would say, for example, here is the loan, here is the terms. My brother, if that money is to give farmers fertilizer, seeds, Gramazone, Primiseed, Roundup, and give them all what they need to do something positive. Sometimes, Mr. Drago, half of the money going in campaign funds, campaign peripherals, rum, party, CO, and then guess we still have to pay the loan. And so one of the things is the policies sometimes is not just the IMF. If we use it for what it's worth, like for example, like Dr. Thompson Fountain was saying, to build industries that we can make money instead of, just taking loans. And so that's another problem. So that's number two. And the last one I would say is the fact that the undergoing IMF program provides access to additional funding and other resources domestically and internationally that would likely have been otherwise unavailable. The ability to pay civil servants and meet payment obligations, both domestically and internationally, remains an ongoing problem for Caribbean islands. And that is the view, So I gave you 3 answers there. It's really tough for us because we need it. The other problem, number 2, is the fact that our leaders sometimes misuse it, misdirect the use of those funds. And the third one is we have an ongoing problem where sometimes we cannot meet our domestic expenditure to pay our nurses and our teachers and policemen. Sometimes we have problems paying our domestic bill. And then thing. Now, I will tell you something before I end on that note. Is the whole idea of some of the ideas the IMF give. Again, for our Caribbean people. Some of the pragmatic and strategic thing they say is, one, cut down your expenditure and increase your revenue. If you are economists, it makes sense. Of course, cut down your expenditure and increase your revenue. Okay, what does that mean in a practical way for Dominica? Cut their expenditure means what? Tell you what it means, Mr. Drigo?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It means you have 15 students in a class for one teacher. Put 50 students in a class.
So reduce your workforce.
You hit the nail on the head. That means some teachers' head have to roll. What you cut in your expenditure,
Mm-hmm.
and that applies around the board. Okay, increase your revenue. Since you know yourself, you have a little garage by the bayside fixing people's car. You never had to pay license. Increase your revenue. Right now, that little garage you have there, you have to pay a license.
You know, and we come back to Kenya. That's what the government tried to do in Kenya. Why we have all this unrest in Kenya.
And I can go on and on, if other ways.
But I come back to what you say, and I know you reframe my question, and I liked it. I'm going to reframe your answer to say that, and I'm going to use Matilda Popo says that in her opinion, if our resources are logically utilized with added value and leaders are pragmatic and strategic, we can do very well in the Caribbean. I am going to interpret that to mean that yes, we can discard the IMF, or we can use them as bridge funding. We can use them for now. We need the money, and as you said, implement it properly so that it is income generating, and then we don't need them anymore. I'm combining what Matilda is saying and the answer that I got from you, because you premised your answer on after 40 years. And remember, I added in to say that our economies are very small. How much does it take to run 2 hospitals, 10 schools, maintain 100 miles of road? You have maybe 2,000 people on pension. Very, very small, minuscule expenses. And you have a whole country that can produce, that the British and the French and the Spanish were able to build empires with. So I agree completely with Matilda that if our leaders are strategic and responsible, we may need the IMF in the short term, like in the first 20 years. But after 20 years, we should have been able to develop ourselves to where we can go to Trinidad for a loan. If we need a loan, we can go to Jamaica. We can trade some of our water with St. Lucia in exchange for whatever they have. And our region should be much better off than it. So I know you didn't say that, but I am concluding that we should not be still in need of the IMF and the World Bank.
I concur.
And so what do we have to do to get okay, so we've made the errors in the first 40, 50 years. What are we to do? What would it take for the next 20 years when our children and our parents and their children are coming of age?
Okay, so
that
let me take
they come out from under that yoke. Mm-hmm.
Let me take a pen and paper and tell you. Number one, we need them
right now.
Yeah. When we get the loan, use it properly.
Use it wisely. Okay.
Right. That's number one. So If we get a loan for hurricane, please use it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I will share with you that on Kingdom Connection, Pastor Rodney, I heard Pastor Jack said that when he came to the US, he was treated impartially, undiscriminately, right? The whole view that that they give him the money just because he was a citizen or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we get the money, do not use it for campaign.
Don't give somebody fertilizer because they are a supporter of the government, and
The
somebody
government.
who really needs it doesn't get it.
Right.
Okay.
And not alone. Don't use it because you want to take some of it for your own political gain.
Right.
Yeah, that's number one.
Mhm.
Number two, markets for our local products, for our farmers and for our fishermen and so forth.
Mhm.
Yeah, markets. Now, the markets, we would have to invest in transportation. We would have to invest in transportation. Yeah, which means, we'll have to get things to come to the US. Okay, this whole view of China, China is not the worst. China is not the demon, China have the largest population on earth. What we should see as investors is that China is a huge market. So any relationship we have with them is ask them, is there a way? The first time I will take a loan is with China. Give us a loan where we can get transportation, that everything Dominica producing the same way we give to Great Britain, we can send to you. And your people will buy.
But on our terms. Because we used to send it to Britain on Britain terms. So we didn't see the benefit.
Yeah, but our people still used to have 4-wheel drives and still used to have a livelihood.
But it was very temporary, because as soon as that fell apart, everything fell down.
Yes, I understand. In 1995, with Bill Clinton, right? And these are some of the things that we can look at. Another thing again, our people, this divisive politics is not helping, Mr. Drago. It's not helping. I cannot imagine a leader can tell people, throw hot water on people, call them traitors. I tell you, I cannot imagine that. So we have to, and listen.
Term limits. I'm not going back to the argument, but term limits is the answer. But go ahead.
Okay. We haven't got to, no, I want to talk about that because we should talk about that. How much time do we have?
Well, we like the government, we're in a race. But go ahead, make your point.
I want to say thank you so much, but I would like to say that we don't have to wait for hurricane for us to have a little spiritual and a little humanitarian side to us. Do we have to wait for hurricane for that to happen? We have to love each other. We are each brother's keeper. Look now, Trinidad is going to help St. Kitts. Grenada and St. Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I go and play cricket, those guys I meet, they say, "Where are you from?" I mean, "I'm from Jamaica, man," and they talk nice to me, and so we are each other's keeper. We are one people, we are one people, and so this divisiveness in Dominica politics, where people are not talking to their neighbors or their families because of political party, not because I'm a scientist, it's just because of I am a child of God. That should not be the case. Leave it alone. Ask God to forgive you for your sins. Turn away from your wicked ways and love your people. That too, and God say, if you do that, I am not a preacher, but God say, if my people call me by my name, turn away from their sins, confess their sins to me, he say, I will give them everything they need. I don't know if it's so he said it, but you understand, right? Yes.
Not really, but go ahead.
You're funny. But
we don't want to bring religion in the conversation,
no,
because
but
we'll be here until tomorrow morning. You and I will be here talking till tomorrow morning.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, I finish. I think I said
No, seriously. But what I think we need in the Caribbean is what we alluded to. It's a simpler plan. It's a plan and it's an aspiration. We have to have an aspiration to our people that 5 years from now, when there's a hurricane, no matter how bad the hurricane is, the majority of our people will stay safe, the majority of our property will stay undamaged, and we can bounce back within 12 months. If we set that as an aspiration, it's going to guide the way we farm, it's going to guide how we build our roads, it's going to guide how we build our homes, it's going to guide how we manage our money, because we want to make sure we have some reserve to help people to recover when there's a hurricane. So, so that is what is missing. What is missing is to have our people with a certain vision and a certain aspiration as to how they would like to see themselves live. Right now, the aspiration in the Caribbean is that I hope when my child get finished in high school, he can get a chance to go to America or England. That cannot be an aspiration of our people, and we can hope to survive and thrive. We have to have an aspiration that our country is such that all of this wonderful climate that we have, that we and our generations can stay in place and enjoy all of the bountiful gifts that Dominica has to offer to us. That I don't have to be in God-forsaken New York fighting traffic to go to work, in snow, in heat, in whatever it is. My aspiration should be that I can live in Dominica, I can raise my children in Dominica, and they can enjoy the bountiful fruits of Dominica. And if we have that aspiration and we define it in the terms that you measured in your research, and we genuinely believe in that oil, all of that is going to get taken care of. And if we need to be Christians to say that that is what God wishes for us, and therefore that's what we aspire to, then fine. But until we can inspire our people to have a vision, we just in the Caribbean Sea or the Atlantic Sea, and every wind that blow will take us wherever it wants and knock us off a rock, and we bounce back and we patch the boat, and we next time we go in a chibuche or whatever they call it, and it draw us under, and we come back up with and to me that is what the Caribbean lacks, is the ability of our leaders, or the unwillingness of our leaders to be aspirational so that they can inspire a vision in our people. And that's what I think you and I and all of us should be striving to do, that in the absence of our leaders doing it, we need to do it. And so with that said, and bringing it back in the context of where we're talking, if we have that type of aspiration, it's going to help us when we negotiate with a IMF, with a World Bank, with a World Trade Organization, is going to help us to do that, because Dominica is not even producing enough food for Dominicans. So we can start there. We're importing tomatoes and carrot and water into Dominica. What does that say about us as a people? But you you're the expert, so I talk too much. Um, the way forward that you outlined is very clear, that we need the IMF, we need the World Bank, because we don't have the means right now. But we should approach it from a point of view where this is borrowed money and we treat it like borrowed money. Because you and I in our life not going to take a loan and go on vacation. If we take a loan, we know we have to pay it back. Guess what? We're going to tighten up it and try to pay back that money as soon as possible. Our countries need to do the same. And so that is what I think your book says, that we need to get out of that perpetual dependency by one
Correct.
being responsible with the money that we borrow.
That's what my ending comments here.
So go ahead and wrap it up. I don't know if there are areas that you want to touch on that we haven't touched on.
Well,
Feel free to do
there are
that as
other
well.
areas, but we don't have enough time.
Mhm.
I asked some of the governments in the Caribbean about their philosophy on economic theory, as to whether they are structuralists or liberalists or communists, and different views on how. And they were not very forthcoming. I have the answers, they have the results.
But
But I
in
was
general, I mean, were they left leaning or right leaning?
Most of them left. Yeah.
Left leaning.
Mm.
Okay. At least in words.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, um, the other thing I would say is I look at that study and I look at that book, and was part of my dissertation as well, because I realized that there has been very little research, primary research, and how the Caribbean governments see themselves dealing in the international sphere. And a lot of the things that we have is books that people wrote and they read. But where is the primary data? Have you literally asked a Caribbean leader, what is your view on that? And you might be surprised, Mr. Drygo, that some of them have no idea what even they want, you know. It's just the permanent secretary doing that, and that's how it is, and that's how it is. Every year we have that holiday. It's a mess. And so I believe also, we never mentioned that, but I believe we do need to perhaps have training. Look at me as a professor. Do you know almost every week I have like 2 training to attend? It has been like that for over 20 years. So you're telling me our prime minister and them gonna get training? Of course they do. They need it to broaden their way of thinking, to perhaps consider alternatives of the way they operate. Yeah. And so the book talks about the fact that after 40 years of taking IMF, since we've been independent, things are difficult, and that the Caribbean leaders need to consider other alternatives. And in the book, I point out other alternatives. It might not be popular with other people, but it's an alternative. You know,
So, for example,
I gave you some examples
I
already.
know. Okay, like look at
China,
different. Yeah, China. Okay. Hmm.
um, and to renegotiate with the people that we currently deal with and that we have traditionally dealt with, to let them know, I mean, these are the things. Now, again, I would re-mention it. And again, that's good that you asked me that. Carrie Levitt, the professor in Canada, she says, we really, when you bargain in, somebody have a stronger end than you, like what they call leverage.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we do not have the leverage. So we really are in need.
We perceive we don't have the leverage.
Well, that's another argument. But
The
truth be,
perception is reality, right?
man, you like poems, man.
Yeah, it's true. If you perceive you have no leverage, then you have no leverage,
Okay.
right?
Um,
And
you
it
mean
and it comes from the training that you're saying. I mean, who trains our leaders in negotiation?
good question. Yeah. Yeah. So what time do you normally end that show?
So on paper, just like you found that in your research,
Uh,
on paper it's supposed to be an hour-long show, but in reality, we exhaust the topic. Not exhaust, but we make sure that when we leave the audience, we've left them with like we do. I could have done that tonight. I think our audience is much more familiar with the role of the IMF.
Absolutely, yes.
They're much more familiar with the relationship that we've experienced with the IMF, and they probably have a slightly different perspective on the dealings that we have with China and why we have those type of dealings, and maybe how we can take lessons that's learned from dealing with the Western ones and take it those lessons to dealing with China. Because if we go into China with the same attitude and the same perspective as we did with the IMF and the World Bank, the Chinese are not. They have their own self-interest. They will take advantage of us the same way. You know.
Mm.
So I think tonight we've been able to shine a light on some dark areas. I think there's need for you to come back. If anything, I like to argue politics, so just to argue about term limits and how important, But seriously, I totally like what we did tonight. Where I am so confident that we've left our audience more informed. and at least thinking of things from a different angle. I think I believe we've accomplished that. Alvin says anytime a country is riddled in corruption, no amount of loan, whether it's from the IMF, World Bank, will move us any closer to progress and development. It would be interesting to hear Dr. Dion's view on Singapore's development. So before you answer that though, people tout Singapore, and Dominica really is a good comparison for Dominica because they're about the same size, they're an island. At the time they perceived they had limited resources, then their perspective changed and their reality changed. Um, but I have friends who were admirers of Singapore and they moved to Singapore and they did not last 3 months. They found it very suffocating to live in Singapore and they moved to a country in South America instead within 3 months. Um, but from an economic point of view, there may be a reasonable beacon to set our sights on as a benchmark. What
Yeah.
is your opinion of Singapore?
Well, honestly, I know they are called the tiger economies, Taiwan, Singapore, and them. A lot of labor intensive, and they have improved. I am very tired, but my view is they have done well. They have used their human resource very effectively. Their human resource, not overseas, and it's very export oriented. And it's I think it's referred to as the tiger economies. Those
Mhm.
countries there in Southeast Asia, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they have
So
done well. That's my view.
yeah, so there are lessons there that we can learn from. The last lesson I want to mention that, and you don't have to comment on it because we're going to close.
Yeah.
Um, Norway. Norway was experiencing a lot of economic shocks, similar to what hurricanes do to us. There's a hurricane, we suffer. Norway's shock was in the petroleum industry. Every time there was a dip, the people would suffer and so on. And what they created was a sovereign fund, and they invested that money. And now, when petroleum prices dip, they have that fund that they can use to help shore up their people, so their suffering and their people don't fall. And I want to put it here in this conversation that our governments can look at Norway. In fact, Norway has they go to different countries and show them how they did it so that they can do it too. And so that is another thing that we can look at and we can do. But I see that I've kept you too long. I have
I'm
I
tired.
have
Yeah. I've been,
indulged a
I've been
lot.
up since 4 o'clock this morning.
So I'm going to let you go. I'll let you wrap up and then we can call it a night. But I want to say thank you very much for your time and for generously sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Well, thank you. I mean, hopefully tonight, what we did is we basically looked at the context of our problem, the fact that over 40 years of independence for most of us in the Caribbean, some of us are younger, we have not really achieved what we want, which is economic and socio-economic development. There are some things I left out. The fact that Trinidad and Jamaica and Guyana, they are by population and by geography, almost 80 or 90% of the Caribbean, believe it or not, both by land and by population. And so
Hmm.
things that why we left off, it doesn't matter. But that just gives some context to the whole understanding. And of course, we look at the problem. How do the leaders perceive the IMF? And we look at the fact of the origin of the IMF. We also ventured into the World Bank and the WTO, World Trade Organization. We look at what is a typical SAP program, SAP meaning Structural Adjustment Program. We talked about the fact that they want to bring down expenditure, increase revenue, and we see exactly what that means in a practical sense. I also ventured to mention the view of the 4 stages of development from persons like Arthur Lewis and George Beckford, and
Hmm.
we talked about several authors like Walter
Walter
Rodney,
Rodney.
yeah, and Paul
Hmm.
Aki, and
And Carrie
I relive it.
Levitt,
Yeah,
like Carrie Levitt. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And so then we look at the options of how we can move forward. And so I think it was very comprehensive. I think it was a good discussion. That's my view. I hope that the listening public found some utility and some use of this discussion, and perhaps they can have a better conceptual understanding of how things work, and where we are, and how it applies to us. And so I want to thank God, and I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. And really, really luminary. Um, Congratulations on your books, folks. I really want you to support Dr. George, and not just supporting him for the sake of supporting him. You actually getting some really quality work and really informed work. One of the things that we lack in the region is data and data collection and decision made based on data. So I encourage you to get his book, The Politics of Intergovernmental Relations, and CARICOM and the IMF, Perpetual Dependencies. Great, great read. Make that part of your library. I encourage you to go get it. It's available on Amazon. And so, Dr. George, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
And
welcome.
let's do this again. I really enjoyed the conversation, and from the interaction of the audience, they also did. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless you. Yeah?
All right, great, awesome.
And may God bless Dominica and protect us in this hurricane season. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely. We hope that our folks are spared. All right. So, folks, thank you so much for staying with us. We went almost 2 hours, but the information was rich, and so we couldn't condense it too much. But I hope you got a better understanding of the IMF, the role of the IMF, why it was created, what it is being used for. The IMF and the World Bank are basically being used as tools um, for the international, we don't call it diplomacy, but they provide resources that we can use for our benefit, and we delved a lot into the politics of our region, and why do we tolerate, why do we think that it's okay to have leaders that stay in power for 20 years. We are young countries, and so to have one person in power for half of the time that we've been independent is crazy, in my opinion anyway. Whether that person is performing or not, I think a change is always good, for all the reasons that we change our bed sheets and we sweep our houses and we change our clothes. um, you know, a rolling stone gathers no moss. On the other hand, you have all kinds of quass and commerce and dust that collects under anything that stays in one place for too long. And so we need to interrogate that. But it's not just that change for the sake of change. I think that change is necessary because we are not where we should be. We're not where we should be. I saw a report this week of the 10 leading countries, the people who are over 100 years, and Dominica did not even feature. You know, Guadeloupe and Martinique and Barbados featured. Dominica did not even feature. What does that tell you? That the life expectancy in Dominica is certainly decreasing. We used to be the leading country in the world in terms of centenarians. Now we don't even feature in the top 10. Why do we keep a leadership in place that's no longer producing results or no longer taking us in the direction that we need to go? All our institutions are being deteriorated, and therefore we cannot hold accountability. What is the arrangement? Under what terms and conditions are we getting financing from China, from the World Bank, from the IMF? What are the terms and those things should be public knowledge. They should not be secret. It's as if you own a company, someone is running your company, and they're keeping things from you because you don't have a right to know. We have a right to know, and of course, so Dr. George really put a lot of things on the table, and that we can chew on and we can digest. So I thank him so much, and I thank you for staying all of this time. We thought it's almost 2 hours, but I think it was a 2 hours well spent. So good night, folks. Those of you who are in the US, happy Independence Day, 4th of July. That's when Americans celebrates their independence, the observation of independence. And so, if you are in the U.S. and it's a holiday, you can reflect on what independence is supposed to mean to us as Dominicans, as Caribbean people. Those of you who have folks in Carriacou and Petit Martinique and Grenada and St. Vincent and Union and all of these places, I hope your family is safe. And I hope that the property damage is not too heavy, and that I wish you guys speedy return to normalcy. So, folks, we do this again next week. Thank you so much for staying on, and have a good remainder of your week. Enjoy the holiday week. It's a short week in the US. Um, and we remember those who are in shelters. I understand that there are a lot of people in shelters in some of those islands that were heavily hit, and so our thoughts are with you. Good night, everyone.